The mountain air turned sharp and bitter the moment Clara Reynolds heard the beam crack above her head, and she threw herself forward just as the massive wooden support came crashing down behind her, trapping her younger brother beneath the rubble of their half-built barn. "Samuel!" Clara screamed, her voice raw with terror as she scrambled back toward the wreckage. Dust choked the air, and she could see his leg pinned beneath one of the main support beams, his face twisted in pain. "Hold on, hold on." Her hands found the beam, rough pine that still smelled of sap and sawdust, and she pulled with everything she had. It did not budge, not even an inch. Samuel cried out, 12 years old and trying so hard to be brave, and Clara felt her heart splinter in her chest. "I am going to get you out," she promised, bracing her feet and trying again. Her muscles screamed, her back protested, but the beam remained immovable. Blood roared in her ears. "Just hold on, Samuel. Please hold on." She heard footsteps then, heavy and purposeful, and a shadow fell across her. Clara looked up, still gripping the beam, and saw him. The man was enormous, standing well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed carved from the mountains themselves. His hair, dark brown and thick, fell past his collar in waves that suggested he had not seen a barber in months. His arms, visible beneath rolled shirt sleeves, were corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard labor and harder living. His jaw was strong, covered with several days of dark stubble, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds. "Let go," he said, his voice deep and rough. Clara blinked. "What?" "Step back," he repeated, already moving toward the beam. "Now." Something in his tone made her obey, and she scrambled backward just as the man bent down, positioned himself, and lifted. The beam rose as though it weighed nothing at all, his muscles bunching beneath his shirt, his face showing concentration but not strain. He held it there, steady as stone. "Pull him out," the mountain man ordered. Clara did not waste a second. She grabbed Samuel under his arms and dragged him free of the debris. The moment they were clear, the man lowered the beam with controlled precision, then turned to face them. His eyes went immediately to Samuel, assessing. "Let me see," he said, kneeling beside the boy. "Who are you?" Clara asked, though she was already moving aside to let him look. Her hands were shaking. "Colton Armstrong." His hands moved over Samuel's leg with surprising gentleness, checking for breaks. The boy whimpered, and Colton's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Easy, son. I know it hurts." "Is it broken?" Clara heard the tremor in her own voice and hated it. "Does not feel like it," Colton said, his fingers probing carefully. "But he is going to have some impressive bruising, and he needs to stay off it for a few days." He looked at Samuel directly. "You understand me?" "No running around." Samuel nodded, tears streaking through the dust on his face. "Yes, sir." Only then did Colton turn his attention to Clara, and she felt the full weight of his gaze. His eyes moved over her systematically, checking for injuries with the same thoroughness he had shown her brother. "You hurt anywhere?" he asked. "No, I am fine," Clara said, though her hands were still trembling. "I got clear before it fell. Let me see your hands." She held them out automatically, only then realizing they were scraped raw from trying to lift the beam. Colton took them in his own, turning them gently to examine the damage. His hands were rough with calluses but surprisingly warm, and Clara felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "These need cleaning," he said. "You have water nearby." "Inside the house," Clara managed. "But Samuel, I will carry him." Colton scooped the boy up as easily as he had lifted the beam, cradling him against his chest. "Show me." Clara led them to the small house that stood 30 yards from the ruined barn. It was modest, just 4 rooms, but it was clean and well kept. Her father had built it 15 years ago when he first staked his claim in these Colorado mountains outside Concord. Now, 2 years after his death, it was just Clara and Samuel trying to keep the homestead running. Inside, Colton laid Samuel on the narrow bed in the back room, then straightened and looked around. His eyes took in everything. The neat interior, the mended curtains, the carefully stocked shelves, the signs of a household run by someone doing their best with limited resources. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "Dead." Clara moved to the basin to fetch water. "Our father passed 2 years back. Our mother died when Samuel was born." She saw something shift in Colton's expression, something that might have been respect or sympathy, and then it was gone, replaced by his previous calm assessment. "You have been running this place alone. Someone has to." Clara poured water into a bowl and grabbed clean cloths. "We manage." "That barn says otherwise." The words should have stung, but they were delivered without judgment, simply stating fact. Clara felt her shoulders tense anyway. "We had help," she said, perhaps more sharply than necessary. "George Mercer from town was supposed to be here today, but he did not show. Samuel and I thought we could at least get the framework up." She looked at her brother, who was trying not to cry. "Obviously, we were wrong." Colton took the bowl from her hands and set it on the small table. "Sit down." "I need to tend to Samuel. Sit down." He gestured to the chair. "Boy is resting. You are about to fall over." Clara wanted to argue, but her legs chose that moment to start shaking, the delayed shock finally hitting her. She sat. Colton pulled another chair close and took her hands again, dipping a cloth in the water. He cleaned the scrapes with careful precision, his touch firm but gentle. This close, Clara could see the details of him. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of difficult nights. He smelled like pine and leather and something else, something wild and clean that made her think of high mountain air. "You live around here?" she asked, needing to fill the silence. "Up in the mountains," he said, not looking up from his work. "I come down for supplies about once a month." "And you just happened to be passing by when our barn collapsed, heard the crash, came to investigate." He finished with one hand and started on the other. "Lucky I did." "Yes." Clara swallowed hard, the reality of what could have happened crashing over her. "Thank you. If you had not been there, but I was." His eyes met hers, and there was something fierce in them. So no point in thinking about what might have been. They sat in silence for a moment while he finished cleaning her wounds. Through the doorway, Clara could hear Samuel's breathing evening out, sleep claiming him despite his pain. "The barn is in bad shape," Colton said finally, setting the cloth aside. "That whole framework needs to come down and be rebuilt properly." "I know." Clara stood and moved to look out the window at the wreckage. "I just do not have the money to hire help right now. We spent everything we had on the lumber." "What about neighbors?" "The nearest homestead is 5 miles east. The Johnsons. They have their own troubles." She crossed her arms, feeling suddenly defensive. "We will figure it out." Colton rose from his chair, and the small room seemed to shrink around his presence. He was quiet for a long moment, and Clara could almost see him thinking, weighing options. "I will do it," he said finally. Clara turned. "What?" "I will rebuild your barn." He said it simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "Will take about 2 weeks if the weather holds. I cannot pay you, did not ask you to." "Then why would you?" "Because you need help and I am here." He moved toward the door, clearly considering the matter settled. "I will be back tomorrow morning. Make a list of what other supplies you need beyond what you have already." Clara followed him. "Mr. Armstrong, I appreciate the offer, but I cannot accept charity." He turned to face her on the porch, and for the first time she saw something that might have been amusement in his eyes. "Then feed me while I work," he said. "Call it payment." Before Clara could respond, he was walking away, his long strides carrying him back toward the ruins of the barn. She watched him examine the wreckage, his trained eye clearly assessing the damage and planning the rebuild. The late afternoon sun caught in his hair, turning it almost gold at the edges, and Clara found herself noticing the way his shirt stretched across his back, the easy confidence in his movements. She shook herself. The man was helping them, nothing more. She should be grateful, not standing here like some foolish girl noticing the breadth of his shoulders. "Clara." Samuel's voice came from inside, weak and scared. She pushed away from the doorframe and went to her brother, settling on the edge of his bed. His leg was already starting to swell, the bruising dark beneath his pant leg. "How do you feel?" she asked, brushing his hair back from his forehead. "It hurts," he admitted. "But Clara, that man, he was so strong. Did you see how he lifted that beam? It took 4 men to put it in place, and he just picked it up like it was nothing. I saw. Is he really going to help us build the barn?" "That is what he said." Samuel's eyes were already drifting closed again. "That is good. We need the barn finished before winter. Father always said a homestead is not a homestead without a proper barn." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Father said a lot of things. He would have liked Mr. Armstrong," Samuel murmured, sleep pulling him under. "He is strong like Father was." After Samuel fell asleep, Clara returned to the porch. Colton was still at the barn site, now stacking the usable lumber into organized piles, separating the broken pieces from what could be salvaged. The man worked with methodical efficiency, and Clara marveled again at his strength. Beams that she and Samuel had struggled to move together, he handled alone. She should start dinner, she thought. If he was going to be here tomorrow, she needed to plan meals, stretch their supplies. They had vegetables from the garden, some preserved meat, flour for bread. Not much, but she could make it work. She always made it work. The sun was setting behind the mountains when Colton finally stopped working. He dusted his hands on his pants and walked back to the house. Clara met him on the porch, a cup of water in her hand. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said. He took the cup and drained it in a few long swallows. "Appreciate it. I made a list." She pulled the paper from her apron pocket. "Of what we need. But Mr. Armstrong, I really think—" "Colton," he interrupted. "If I am going to be here for 2 weeks, might as well use my name. Colton." She tried it out, found she liked the feel of it. "I still do not understand why you are doing this." He handed back the cup, and his eyes were serious when they met hers. "You ever spent a winter in these mountains, Clara?" The use of her name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "My whole life. Then you know how brutal it gets. Snow that can bury a house, cold that can kill in minutes." He gestured toward where the barn had stood. "You and that boy need proper shelter for livestock, for supplies. Without it, you will not make it through. We were going to finish it." "No, you were not." The words were blunt but not unkind. "That framework was set wrong from the start. Another week and the whole thing would have come down, probably would have killed one of you in the process." He paused. "Your father built this house. I can see his work in it. He knew what he was doing. But that barn, someone gave you bad advice on how to raise it." Clara thought of George Mercer, who had seemed so confident, so knowledgeable. "I trusted the wrong person. Easy mistake." Colton settled his hat back on his head. "But it ends now. I will be here at dawn. Keep that boy off his feet and make sure he drinks plenty of water. The swelling should go down in a day or 2. He started to leave, and Clara found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Where will you stay?" "It is a long ride back to the mountains in the dark." Colton paused. "I have camped in worse places. We have a barn. Well, we had a barn." She hesitated. "There is a lean-to out back. It is not much, but it has a roof and 3 walls. You are welcome to it if you want to save yourself the ride." For a long moment she thought he would refuse, Then he nodded once. "Appreciate the offer," he said. "I will get my gear." He disappeared into the gathering darkness, and Clara went back inside to check on Samuel one more time. Her brother was sleeping peacefully, his face relaxed despite the pain he had to be in. She pulled the blanket up to his chin, then moved to the kitchen to start planning tomorrow's meals. She heard Colton return, the soft sounds of him settling into the lean-to. It was strange, having someone else on the property. For 2 years it had been just her and Samuel against the world. She had grown used to the solitude, the self-reliance. Now, in the span of a few hours, everything had shifted. Clara moved to the window and looked out into the darkness. She could see the faint glow of a small fire near the lean-to, Colton's silhouette moving in front of it. He was doing something with his gear, organizing his supplies for the morning, probably. Everything about him spoke of competence, of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and wasted no motion doing it. She wondered what his story was. What drove a man to live alone in the mountains, coming to town only once a month for supplies? What had shaped him into someone who would stop his own journey to help strangers rebuild a barn tomorrow? She told herself. Tomorrow she would ask some of those questions. Tonight, she needed to rest and be grateful that Samuel was safe and that help, unexpected and unbidden, had arrived just when they needed it most. She banked the fire, checked the locks on the doors out of habit, and retired to her own small room. Through the window, she could still see the glow of Colton's fire, a small point of warmth in the darkness. Sleep came slowly, her mind replaying the moment when the beam had fallen, the terror of seeing Samuel trapped, and then Colton appearing like something out of a story, strong enough to lift what she could not budge. She remembered the gentleness of his hands as he checked her wounds, the serious intensity in his eyes, the way he had made a decision to help and would not be swayed from it. Clara Reynolds had spent 2 years believing she had to handle everything alone. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, it was all right to accept help when it was offered with honest intentions. The rooster woke her before dawn, and Clara rose quickly, washing her face in the basin and braiding her hair into a practical plait. She dressed in one of her 2 work dresses, both worn but clean and tied on her apron. In the kitchen, she built up the fire and started coffee, then mixed dough for biscuits. They had eggs from their chickens, and she scrambled those with some wild onions from the garden. It was a simple breakfast, but it was hot and filling. Colton appeared at the door just as the sun was breaking over the mountains. His hair was damp, suggesting he had washed in the creek, and his shirt was different from yesterday, though equally work-worn. He had shaved, and Clara found herself noticing the strong line of his jaw, the way the morning light caught in his eyes. "Morning," he said. "Something smells good." "Come in," Clara replied, gesturing to the table. "It is not much, but it should hold you through the morning." He removed his hat and sat, looking slightly uncomfortable in the domestic setting. Clara poured coffee and set a plate in front of him, then went to check on Samuel. Her brother was awake, sitting up in bed with a grimace on his face. "I need to help," he said immediately. "Clara, there is too much work. You are staying in that bed," she said firmly. "Colton said you need to rest that leg and you are going to listen. But no arguments," she softened her tone. "I know you want to help, Samuel, but the best thing you can do right now is heal. We cannot afford for you to make that injury worse." She brought him breakfast in bed, an indulgence they rarely afforded, and Samuel ate with the appetite of a growing boy. By the time she returned to the kitchen, Colton had finished his meal and was standing at the window, looking out at the barn site. "That was good," he said. "Thank you." "There will be more at midday," Clara replied, collecting his plate, "and supper after that. You do not have to go to so much trouble." "It is what we agreed. You work, I feed you." She met his eyes. "A deal is a deal." Something shifted in his expression, a hint of respect. "Fair enough." They walked to the barn site together, and Colton showed her what he had planned. The old framework would need to be completely torn down, the foundation reinforced, and then a new structure built from the ground up. He explained his process, pointing out where the previous design had been flawed, where the weight distribution was wrong. Clara listened, absorbing the information. She had grown up watching her father work, had learned more about carpentry and building than most women her age, but Colton's knowledge ran deeper. This was not just something he had learned. It was something he knew in his bones. "Can I help?" she asked when he finished explaining. He looked at her for a long moment. "You know how to use a hammer, my father taught me." "Then yes." He handed her a crowbar. "We start by pulling down what is left standing, carefully. I do not want anything else coming down on anyone." They worked through the morning, the physical labor hard but satisfying. Colton was right, Clara realized quickly. The entire framework had been set wrong. It was a miracle the whole thing had not come down sooner. The thought of what could have happened, of Samuel being hurt worse or killed, made her stomach turn. "You all right?" Colton asked, pausing in his work. "Just thinking," Clara said, "about how badly this could have gone. But it did not." He drove a nail with one powerful strike. "You got him out, that is what matters, because you were here." "I was in the right place at the right time." He looked at her directly. "But you were trying to save him before I showed up. You did not run for help. You did not panic. You started trying to lift that beam yourself." "A lot of good it did me. I could not budge it." "That is not the point." Colton set down his hammer. "The point is you tried. Most people would have frozen or run. You fought for your brother. That takes courage." Clara felt her cheeks warm. She was not used to compliments, especially not delivered with such straightforward sincerity. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Colton said quietly. "They would not have." They returned to work, and Clara found herself stealing glances at him between tasks. The morning sun was climbing higher, and Colton had removed his shirt, working in just his undershirt. His arms were corded with muscle, his movements powerful but controlled. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and Clara forced herself to focus on her own work before he caught her staring. At midday, she went inside to prepare lunch. Samuel was frustrated at being confined to bed, but Clara brought him books from their small collection and promised he could sit on the porch tomorrow if his leg was better. When she called Colton in to eat, she found him washing up at the pump, water streaming down his arms and face. "Lunch is ready," she said, and her voice came out slightly breathless. He dried off and followed her inside, and they ate in companionable silence. Clara had made vegetable stew with the last of the preserved meat, and Colton ate 2 full bowls before sitting back with a satisfied sigh. "You are a good cook," he said. "My mother taught me before she died." Clara stood and collected the dishes. "She said a woman who can cook well will never go hungry, even in hard times. Smart woman, she was." Clara moved to the wash basin. "I wish I remembered more about her. I was only 5 when we lost her." Colton was quiet for a moment. "My mother died when I was young too," he said finally. "Fever took her when I was 7. My father raised me and my brother alone after that." It was the first personal thing he had shared, and Clara felt oddly honored. "Is your father still in the area?" "No. He died about 5 years back. My brother went east, wanted to see cities and civilization." Colton stood and brought his bowl to her. "I stayed in the mountains. You prefer the solitude? I prefer the honesty of it." He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. "Mountains do not lie to you. They are hard and beautiful and dangerous, and they never pretend to be anything else." People could learn something from that. Clara understood what he meant. She had lived in Concord long enough to know that civilization came with complications, with politics and pretense and games she had no patience for. "Is that why you live up there alone?" she asked. "Part of it." He was quiet for a moment. "I spent some time in town years back. Worked at the lumber mill, tried to be part of the community, but it did not suit me. I am better off on my own." "Do you get lonely?" The question was out before Clara could stop it. Too personal, too probing. But Colton did not seem offended. He considered it seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely is better than feeling like you do not fit anywhere." Clara dried her hands on her apron. "I understand that," she said softly. "After Father died, people in town were kind at first. They brought food, offered help. But then they started suggesting that maybe Samuel and I should give up the homestead, that maybe I should find a husband to take care of us. As if the land my father built was not worth fighting for, as if I was not capable of managing it myself. So you stopped asking for help." "I stopped accepting it when it came with strings attached." She met his eyes. "That is why I am grateful for you being here, Colton. You are helping because it is the right thing to do, not because you expect something in return." "Everyone deserves that kind of help," he said simply. "Not everything has to be a transaction." They returned to work, and the afternoon passed in steady progress. By the time the sun started sinking toward the mountains, they had cleared away all the damaged framework and sorted the lumber into salvageable and scrap piles. It was hard, satisfying work, and Clara felt good about what they had accomplished. She made supper while Colton washed up again, and they ate on the porch as the sky turned gold and purple. Samuel joined them, hobbling out on his injured leg with Clara's help. The swelling had gone down some, and the boy was in better spirits. "Mr. Armstrong," Samuel said, his eyes bright with curiosity, "Clara said you live up in the mountains. What is it like?" Colton considered the question. "Peaceful," he said after a moment. "My cabin sits in a valley between two peaks. There is a stream that runs year-round, and in the summer the meadow fills with wildflowers. I have a few traps for food, a small garden. It is a simple life, but it suits me. Are there bears? Some. And mountain lions, wolves, eagles, all kinds of creatures." Colton's expression softened as he talked. "You learn to live alongside them, to respect their territory. Most times they leave you alone if you leave them alone." "I would like to see it someday," Samuel said wistfully. "Maybe when you are older," Colton replied. "It is not an easy place to reach, especially in winter." They talked until the stars came out, Colton answering Samuel's endless questions with patience. Clara listened, learning more about the man who had appeared so unexpectedly in their lives. He spoke about the mountains with a reverence that made her see them differently, not just as the backdrop to her life, but as something alive and worthy of respect. When Samuel's eyes started to droop, Clara helped him back to bed. By the time she returned, Colton had cleaned up from supper and was preparing to retire to the lean-to. "Thank you," Clara said, "for today, for all of it." "We got a good start," Colton replied. "Another few days and we will have the foundation ready to build on." "That is not what I meant." She stepped closer. "Thank you for talking with Samuel. He misses having a man around, someone to look up to. Our father was his hero, and since he has been gone, Samuel has been trying so hard to be grown up, to be the man of the house. But he is just a boy. He needs someone to show him it is all right to still be a boy sometimes." Colton's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "He is a good kid. You have done well with him. I have tried." Clara wrapped her arms around herself against the evening chill. "But I worry I am not enough, that he needs more than I can give him." "That boy knows he is loved," Colton said firmly. "That is the most important thing a child can have. The rest, he will learn as he grows. The words settled something in Clara's chest, an anxiety she had carried for 2 years. "How do you know so much about it? My father raised 2 boys alone. I remember what it was like, what I needed from him." Colton adjusted his hat. "You are doing fine, Clara, better than fine." He left then, heading to the lean-to, and Clara stood on the porch for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead. Something had shifted today, something more than just progress on the barn. She felt less alone than she had in years, and it was both comforting and terrifying. The next 2 weeks fell into a rhythm. Colton arrived at the house each morning for breakfast, worked through the day with Clara's help, and joined them for supper in the evening. Samuel's leg healed quickly, and soon he was helping too, doing what he could while Colton and Clara handled the heavier work. The barn took shape slowly but surely. Colton proved to be not just strong but skilled, his measurements precise, his construction solid. He showed Clara techniques her father had never taught her, ways to reinforce joints and distribute weight. She learned quickly, asking questions, absorbing knowledge, but it was more than just the work. In the quiet moments, during meals or evening conversations, Clara found herself learning about Colton in other ways. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor, revealed in subtle observations that made her laugh unexpectedly. She learned that he was educated, that his father had insisted both sons learn to read and write well. She learned that he loved the mountains with a passion that bordered on reverence, that he could identify birds by their calls and knew which plants were edible and which would kill you. And she learned that he noticed things, small things. He noticed when she was tired and insisted she rest. He noticed when supplies were running low and appeared the next morning with flour or coffee, claiming he had extras he did not need. He noticed that the porch step was loose and fixed it without being asked. He noticed everything, and he cared quietly, without fanfare. Clara found herself watching for him in the mornings, listening for his footsteps on the porch. She found herself lingering over meals, drawing out conversations, reluctant to let him return to work. She found herself noticing the way the sun caught in his hair, the rumble of his laugh, the steadiness of his presence. She was falling for him, she realized one evening as she watched him teach Samuel how to properly set a nail. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, this feeling blooming in her chest. She had thought herself too practical for such things, too focused on survival to indulge in romance. But Colton had slipped past her defenses without even trying, simply by being exactly who he was. The question was whether he felt anything in return. Colton had his own revelations as the days passed. He had come down from the mountains for supplies, planning to be in and out of Concord in a single day as always. He had not planned to stop at a homestead in distress. He certainly had not planned to spend 2 weeks rebuilding a barn, and he absolutely had not planned on Clara Reynolds. She was not like anyone he had ever met. Strong without being hard, kind without being weak, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with fancy dresses or elaborate hairstyles, and everything to do with the light in her eyes when she laughed, the determination in her jaw when she faced a challenge, the gentleness in her hands when she tended to her brother. Colton had lived alone for 5 years, convinced he was better off that way. Now, spending every day with Clara and Samuel, he was starting to question that conviction. The homestead felt alive in a way his cabin never had, full of warmth and laughter and the small intimacies of daily life. Meals shared around a table, quiet conversations in the evening, the comfortable silence of working alongside someone who understood the value of both words and quiet. He caught himself looking for excuses to stay longer, to stretch out the work. The barn could have been finished in 10 days, but he found reasons to add extra reinforcements, to build storage lofts, to construct feed bins they had not discussed. Anything to prolong his time here. It was dangerous, this wanting. Colton had learned years ago that wanting things led to disappointment. Better to need nothing, to expect nothing, to be complete in yourself. But Clara was making him forget those lessons, making him imagine possibilities he had long since abandoned. On the 12th day, they were working on the roof when Clara slipped. It was not serious, just a momentary loss of footing on the ladder, but Colton's heart stopped as he lunged forward and caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist to steady her. "I have got you," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. Clara's hands gripped his shoulders, her face inches from his. He could see golden flecks in her eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath on his skin. For a suspended moment, they stayed frozen, and Colton felt the tension between them crystallize into something undeniable. "Thank you," Clara whispered. He should let her go. He should step back, re-establish the professional distance they had maintained. Instead, he found himself pulling her closer, his hands spreading across her back. "Clara," he began, not sure what he was going to say. "Colton, Clara," Samuel's voice called from the house. "There are people coming up the road." They broke apart, and Colton helped Clara down from the ladder. His hands lingered on her waist, perhaps a moment longer than necessary, and when their eyes met, he saw his own confusion and longing reflected back at him. Then they turned to face the approaching wagon. 3 men rode up the path. An older gentleman in a fine suit, clearly someone of means, and 2 younger men who had the look of ranch hands about them. The older man climbed down from the wagon with the air of someone used to being the most important person in any room. "Miss Reynolds," he said, tipping his hat. "I am Douglas Fairmont. I own the ranch 10 miles south of here. I have heard about your situation." Clara's expression became guarded. "What situation would that be, Mr. Fairmont?" A young woman and her brother trying to run a homestead alone. Fairmont's smile was practiced, smooth. "It is admirable, truly, but these mountains are no place for someone in your position. I have come to make you an offer for your land." "The land is not for sale," Clara said immediately. "Now, do not be hasty." Fairmont gestured around them. "You are struggling. Anyone can see that. Your barn just collapsed, from what I hear. How are you going to get through winter without proper shelter for livestock, without a man to do the heavy work?" Colton felt his jaw tighten, but he remained silent, letting Clara handle this. It was her land, her decision. "We are managing just fine," Clara said, her voice cool. "As you can see, the barn is nearly complete." Fairmont's eyes shifted to Colton for the first time, assessing. "And who might you be?" "Colton Armstrong." "Ah." Something calculating entered Fairmont's expression. "The mountain man. I have heard of you. You keep to yourself. Do not bother with town business." He looked between Colton and Clara. "Are you too?" "Mr. Armstrong is helping us rebuild," Clara interrupted. "That is all." The words stung more than Colton expected, even though they were technically true. He kept his face neutral. Fairmont pulled an envelope from his coat. "Miss Reynolds, I am prepared to offer you a fair price. More than fair, actually. Enough that you could take your brother and start fresh somewhere more suitable, maybe one of the towns in the valley where there are schools and society." "I do not want to start fresh somewhere else," Clara said, her voice rising slightly. "This is my home. My father built it. He is buried here. I am not leaving. Be reasonable." "I am being perfectly reasonable. The answer is no." Fairmont's expression hardened. "You do understand that I could simply wait. Winter will come and you will not be prepared. When you are desperate, the price will be considerably lower." Colton moved forward before he could stop himself, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. "The lady said no," he said quietly. "I suggest you respect that." Fairmont looked at him, and something ugly flickered in his eyes. "This is none of your concern, Armstrong. You do not even live in civilized parts. What happens here is between me and Miss Reynolds." "Not anymore," Colton said, his voice hard as stone. "Now it involves me, and I am telling you to leave." For a moment, tension crackled in the air. Fairmont's ranch hands shifted, hands moving toward their hips, but Colton did not move, did not blink. He had faced down mountain lions and bears. A rancher and his hired muscle did not intimidate him. Fairmont was the first to look away. "This is not over," he said, climbing back into his wagon. "You will regret this stubbornness, Miss Reynolds, both of you." They watched the wagon roll away, dust rising in its wake. Only when it disappeared from sight did Clara let out a shaky breath. "Who is he really?" Colton asked. "Someone who has been buying up homesteads for the last year," Clara said. "The Johnsons told me about him. He pressures people to sell, and if they do not, bad things seem to happen. Accidents, setbacks, nothing you can prove but enough to make life difficult." Colton felt cold fury settle in his gut. "Is he the reason your barn was built wrong?" Clara looked at him sharply. "What do you mean? You said George Mercer was helping you. Did Fairmont recommend him?" "Yes, actually." Clara's face paled. "At church one Sunday, Fairmont introduced us. Said George was skilled, that he would do good work for a fair price. And then George gave you bad advice, set your framework wrong, and disappeared when it mattered." Colton shook his head. "That was not an accident, Clara. Fairmont set you up to fail." The rage on Clara's face matched what he felt. "That son of a—" "Clara," Samuel called from the porch, and she stopped herself. "Sorry," she muttered. "But Colton, if you are right, if he has been sabotaging us this whole time, then we make sure the barn is finished properly, and we make sure you are prepared for winter," Colton said firmly. "We do not give him any opportunity to claim you failed." "We," Clara repeated softly. Colton realized what he had said, how it sounded like a promise of more than just finishing the barn, but he did not take it back. "Yes," he said simply. "We." Something in Clara's expression shifted, hope and fear warring in her eyes. "Colton, you do not have to. I know I do not have to." He stepped closer. "I want to." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Before either could say more, Samuel limped out to join them. "Who was that man?" the boy asked. "Nobody important," Clara said, but her voice was tight. "Come on, let us get back to work. We have a barn to finish." They worked until dark, driven by a new urgency. Fairmont's visit had changed things, made the stakes clear. This was not just about building shelter anymore. It was about proving Clara and Samuel had a right to their land, to their independence. At supper, Samuel finally asked the question Clara had been avoiding. "Are we in trouble?" Clara looked at her brother, this boy who was trying so hard to be brave, and felt her heart ache. "We will be fine," she said. "I promise you, Samuel, we will be fine." Mr. Fairmont seemed mean. "He is used to getting his way," Colton said. "But that does not mean he will get it this time." "Are you going to stay?" Samuel asked bluntly. "After the barn is done, are you going to stay and help us?" The question created a silence that stretched painfully. Colton looked at Clara, and she looked back, both of them knowing that Samuel had asked what neither of them had dared to voice. Colton began, but Samuel cut him off. "Because I think you should stay. I think Clara likes having you here, and I like it too, and maybe you could help us with winter preparations and—" "Samuel," Clara said gently. "That is enough. But Clara, to bed. Now." The boy went reluctantly, leaving Clara and Colton alone on the porch. The night was cool, stars blazing overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. "I am sorry," Clara said after a long moment. "He should not have put you on the spot like that. He is just a kid who wants his family to be safe." Colton leaned against the porch railing. Cannot fault him for that. Still, Clara joined him, leaving a careful distance between them. You have your own life, your own home. We cannot expect you to. What if I wanted to? The question stopped her mid-sentence. She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were wide. What are you saying? Colton had spent 5 years choosing his words carefully, saying only what was necessary. Now he found himself scrambling, trying to articulate feelings he barely understood himself. I am saying that these past 2 weeks, being here, being with you and Samuel, it has been, he stopped, frustrated with his own inadequacy. I am not good with words, Clara. You are doing fine, she said softly. I am trying to say that I do not want to leave. The admission cost him something, a piece of the armor he had built around himself. I have been alone for 5 years, convinced that was what I wanted. But being here with you, I realize I was not living. I was just surviving. Clara moved closer. Colton, let me finish. He turned to face her fully. I know this is fast. I know I am just some mountain man who wandered into your life 2 weeks ago. But Clara, when I look at you, when I am with you, I feel something I have not felt in years. I feel alive. I feel it too, Clara whispered. I have been so scared to admit it, even to myself, but I feel it too. Colton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. I am not good at this, he admitted. I do not know how to court a woman properly, how to say pretty words. I do not need pretty words. Clara's hands came up to rest on his chest, over his heart. I need honesty. I need someone who sees me as capable and strong, not someone who needs to be rescued or managed. I see you, Colton said fiercely. I see exactly who you are, Clara Reynolds, and you are magnificent. She rose up on her toes and he bent down, and when their lips met, it was like coming home to a place he had never been. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, 2 people learning each other. Then Clara made a small sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and Colton wrapped his arms around her, lifting her against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Colton rested his forehead against hers. So what do we do now? He asked. We finish the barn, Clara said practically. We prepare for winter. We figure out how to deal with Fairmont if he tries anything else. She pulled back to look at him. And we see where this goes. I want to stay, Colton said, not just to help with the barn or to protect you from Fairmont. I want to stay because I want to be here with you. Your cabin in the mountains will still be there if I need it. He traced the line of her jaw with his finger. But Clara, I think I have been hiding up there long enough. Maybe it is time I tried living among people again. With you and Samuel, if you will have me. Are you sure? Clara's eyes searched his. This is a hard life. The homestead demands everything. And Samuel and I, we come as a package. You cannot have one without the other. I know, Colton said, and I would not want it any other way. Clara kissed him again, and this time it was less tentative, more certain. When they parted, she was smiling. Then yes, she said. Stay, please stay. They stood together on the porch for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars wheel overhead. It was not a perfect solution. There were still questions to answer, plans to make, obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in years, both of them felt something that had been missing: hope. The next morning, Colton moved his few possessions from the lean-to into the small room attached to the barn, the one Clara's father had built as quarters for hired hands. It was not much, just a bed and a stove and a table, but it was enough. More than enough, because it meant he was part of the homestead now, part of their lives. Samuel was overjoyed when they told him Colton was staying. The boy followed him around like a shadow, asking endless questions, learning everything he could. Colton found he did not mind. He had missed this, he realized, the opportunity to pass on knowledge, to teach and guide. They finished the barn 3 days later. It was solid and well built, with a loft for storage and proper stalls for the livestock they hoped to acquire before winter. Clara stood looking at it, her eyes bright with tears. "Father would have been proud," she said softly. "He should be proud of you," Colton replied, his arm around her shoulders. "You did not give up. You kept fighting for what was his, what is yours." They held a small celebration that night, a special dinner with the last of their preserved berries made into a pie. Samuel proposed a toast with his milk, and they all laughed and clinked their cups together. But the peace did not last long. 2 nights later, Colton woke to the sound of horses. He was up instantly, pulling on his pants and boots, grabbing the rifle that now stayed within arm's reach. Through the window, he could see torches moving in the darkness, heading toward the new barn. He was out the door in seconds, running across the yard. Behind him, he heard Clara scream his name, but he did not stop. There were 3 men, he could see them clearly now in the torchlight, and they were carrying something toward the barn. "Stop right there," Colton roared, and the men froze. He recognized one of them as one of Fairmont's ranch hands from the other day. The man dropped what he was carrying. It looked like oil-soaked rags, and all 3 men scrambled for their horses. Colton fired a shot over their heads, and they kicked their horses into a gallop, disappearing into the darkness. He stood there, breathing hard, rage coursing through him. If he had been a few minutes later, if he had slept through the sound of horses, the barn would be burning right now. Clara reached him, Samuel close behind her. They all stared at the discarded rags, the bottles of oil, the clear evidence of attempted arson. "Fairmont," Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. "That bastard tried to burn down our barn." "We need to go to town," Colton said. "We need to tell the sheriff." "And say what?" "That we think Fairmont sent men to burn our barn, but they ran before we could identify them for certain." Clara shook her head. "Everyone knows the sheriff is in Fairmont's pocket. He will not do anything." She was right, Colton realized. This was frontier justice, where money and influence mattered more than right and wrong. "Then we make sure he knows this will not work," Colton said grimly. "We make sure he understands that we are not going anywhere, and any more attempts will be met with force." The next morning, Colton rode into town. He found Fairmont at the hotel, having breakfast in the dining room like he owned the place. Probably he did, Colton thought bitterly. He walked up to Fairmont's table and set the oil-soaked rags down in front of him. The dining room went quiet. "I believe some of your men dropped these last night," Colton said, his voice carrying. "Thought you might want them back." Fairmont looked at the rags, then at Colton. His face showed nothing but polite confusion. "I am afraid I do not know what you are talking about." "Of course you do not." Colton leaned forward, planting his hands on the table. "But let me make something very clear. The Reynolds homestead is under my protection now. If anything happens to that land, that barn, or those people, I will hold you personally responsible. Do you understand me? Are you threatening me?" Fairmont asked, his voice cold. "I am promising you." Colton straightened. "Clara Reynolds is not leaving her land. You can accept that gracefully, or you can keep pushing. But I promise you, Fairmont, if you keep pushing, you will regret it." He left before Fairmont could respond, aware of every eye in the dining room on him. By evening, the whole town would know what he had said. Good. Let them talk. Let Fairmont know that Clara was not alone anymore. When he returned to the homestead, Clara was waiting for him on the porch. "What did you do?" delivered a message, Colton said, dismounting. "Whether he listens or not remains to be seen." "You should not have confronted him." But Clara's eyes were grateful. "He is dangerous, Colton." "So am I," Colton replied simply, "when it comes to protecting what is mine." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara stepped down from the porch and into his arms. "What is yours?" she repeated softly. "You," Colton said, kissing her forehead. If you will have me, you and Samuel and this homestead, all of it. That is a lot to take on. I know." He tilted her chin up to look at him. "But I have spent 5 years with nothing to protect, nothing to fight for. Now I have everything that matters. I am not about to let some rich rancher take it away." Clara kissed him then, there in the yard with Samuel watching from the window and probably grinning like a fool. When they parted, her eyes were shining. "I love you," she said. "I know it is too soon. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I love you, Colton Armstrong." "I love you too," he replied, and the words felt right, felt true. "Have since the moment I saw you trying to lift that beam, refusing to give up." They stood together in the afternoon sun, holding each other, and for the first time since her father died, Clara felt truly safe. The weeks that followed were busy with preparation for winter. Colton used his knowledge of the mountains to help them stock up properly, to insulate the house, to prepare for the harsh months ahead. He taught Samuel how to hunt and trap, how to read the signs of changing weather. He worked alongside Clara to harvest the last of the garden, to preserve food, to make sure they had enough firewood stacked. And at night they talked. Long conversations on the porch or by the fire, learning each other's histories, dreams, fears. Colton told her about his childhood, about watching his father struggle to raise 2 boys alone. Clara told him about her mother, the few memories she had, and about her father's determination to build something lasting in these mountains. "He used to say that land was the only thing that could not be taken from you if you were willing to fight for it," Clara said one evening, nestled against Colton's side. "I did not understand what he meant until after he was gone, but I get it now. This land is more than just property. It is proof that we existed, that we mattered." "You matter," Colton said fiercely. "Land or no land, you matter, Clara. I know, but I am glad I do not have to choose between the land and mattering." She looked up at him. "I get to have both now because you are here." October brought the first real cold snap, a reminder that winter was coming fast. Colton had been at the homestead for 6 weeks now, and it felt like he had always been there. The barn was not just finished but full. They had managed to buy 2 cows and some chickens with money Colton contributed from his savings. The house repairs were complete. The pantry was stocked. More importantly, the 3 of them had become a family. Samuel called Colton by his first name but looked at him with the adoration of a son for a father. Clara and Colton navigated their relationship with a mix of passion and practicality. Stolen kisses in the barn, hands held under the supper table, quiet nights talking about the future. There had been no more trouble from Fairmont. Whether Colton's warning had worked or the man was simply biding his time remained to be seen. But for now, they were safe. One evening, Colton found Clara sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the mountains. The sunset painted them gold and purple, beautiful and remote. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling beside her. "The future," Clara said. "Whether we are really safe or if Fairmont is just waiting for the right moment. We are as safe as we can be." Colton took her hand. "But Clara, there is something I want to ask you." She turned to look at him, and he saw nervousness in her eyes, mixed with hope. "I do not have a ring yet," Colton said. "And I know I should probably do this proper, ask Samuel for permission first, maybe even take you to town for a fancy dinner. But I have never been good at doing things the conventional way." "Colton, let me finish." He shifted to face her fully. "I know we have only known each other a couple of months. I know people will say it is too fast, too impulsive. But Clara, I have been alive for 32 years, and I have never been more certain of anything than I am about this. About us." Clara's eyes were shining with tears now. "I want to marry you," Colton said simply. "I want to be your husband, Samuel's father, a real part of this family. I want to spend every day working alongside you, every night falling asleep next to you, every year growing old with you. So, Clara Reynolds, will you marry me?" "Yes," Clara breathed, and then louder, "Yes, yes, of course, yes." She threw her arms around his neck and he lifted her, spinning her around right there on the porch. Inside, they heard Samuel cheer. Apparently he had been listening at the window and they both laughed. When Colton set her down, Clara was crying and smiling at the same time. "I love you so much," she said. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but you came into my life exactly when I needed you, and you stayed when you did not have to, and I cannot imagine doing this without you anymore." "You will never have to," Colton promised. "I am here, Clara, for as long as you will have me." They were married a week later in a simple ceremony in Concord. The town's minister performed the service, with Samuel standing as witness and a handful of curious townspeople in attendance. Clara wore her best dress, cream-colored and simple but beautiful, and Colton wore clean clothes and his father's old pocket watch. There was a tense moment when Fairmont appeared at the back of the church, but he simply watched the ceremony with an unreadable expression and left without causing trouble. Clara tried not to let his presence spoil her joy, and mostly succeeded. This was her day, her happiness, and no one could take that from her. After the ceremony, they returned to the homestead. Samuel had decorated the house with wildflowers he had picked that morning, and Clara had baked a cake using precious sugar and eggs. They celebrated as a family, the three of them, and it was perfect. That night, Clara and Colton consummated their marriage in the room that had been only hers but was now theirs. They came together with a mix of passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and joy. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking in whispers. "I never thought I would have this," Clara admitted. "After Father died, I convinced myself that love, partnership, all of that, it was not for me. I had Samuel to raise and land to protect, and that was enough. And now I know I was lying to myself." She traced patterns on his chest. "I was lonely, Colton. So lonely I did not even realize it anymore, but you filled something in me that I did not know was empty." "I know exactly what you mean," Colton said, his hand stroking her hair. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I wake up every morning and remember I get to be here with you, and it still surprises me." "Get used to it," Clara said, kissing his jaw, "because you are stuck with me now, Mr. Armstrong." "Best thing I have ever been stuck with," Colton replied, pulling her closer. Winter came hard that year, just as Colton had predicted. Snow fell heavy and often, and temperatures dropped so low that the water in the basin would freeze overnight. But the homestead held. The barn kept the livestock safe and warm. The house, properly insulated and well-stocked, became a cozy refuge against the brutal weather outside. They fell into the rhythms of winter life. Colton and Samuel would brave the cold each morning and evening to tend the animals. Clara would cook and preserve and mend, keeping their home running smoothly. In the evenings, they would gather around the fire. Colton would tell stories of his years in the mountains, adventures that made Samuel's eyes go wide. Clara would read aloud from their few precious books, her voice bringing stories to life. And at night, in the privacy of their room, Clara and Colton would love each other with a passion that never dimmed, finding warmth and connection in each other's arms. It was not perfect. There were hard days when the work was backbreaking and frustrating. There were moments of tension when three people living in close quarters for months got on each other's nerves. But they worked through it, learning to communicate, to compromise, to be a family in all the messy, complicated ways that mattered. By the time spring arrived, melting the snow and coaxing the first green shoots from the earth, Clara knew with certainty that she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now she was sure. When she told Colton, he lifted her off her feet and spun her around just like he had when she accepted his proposal, his face radiating joy. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Colton said, his hand coming to rest on her still flat stomach. "Clara, you have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning, and now this. I cannot even find words." Samuel was equally thrilled, already planning all the things he would teach his younger sibling. "I will show them how to fish," he declared, "and how to identify animal tracks and which berries are safe to eat. I will be the best big brother." "I know you will," Clara said, hugging him close. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Clara continued working, though Colton insisted she take frequent rests and avoid heavy lifting. The homestead prospered that year. Their garden produced abundantly, the livestock thrived, and they were able to save money for the first time since Clara's father had died. There was still no trouble from Fairmont. Colton made a point of going to town regularly, showing his face, making it clear that the homestead was occupied and protected. Most people were friendly. Some were curious about the mountain man who had settled down, and a few were still clearly in Fairmont's pocket and treated them with suspicion. But mostly, life was good. Better than good. Clara had never been happier in late October as the aspens turned gold and the first frosts kissed the morning grass. Clara went into labor. It was intense and painful and lasted through the night, with Colton holding her hand and talking her through each contraction. Samuel, who had wanted to help, ended up falling asleep in the next room, exhausted by worry. Their son was born just as dawn broke over the mountains, squalling and red-faced and perfect. Colton cut the cord with shaking hands, then wrapped the baby carefully and placed him in Clara's arms. "He is beautiful," Colton breathed. "Clara, he is perfect." "Look at his hands," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "They are so tiny." They named him Jacob after Clara's father, and the baby became the center of their world. Colton proved to be a natural father, patient and gentle despite his size and rough exterior. He would walk Jacob around the house at night when the baby cried, singing old mountain songs in his deep voice until the infant settled. Samuel took his role as big brother seriously, always wanting to help feed the baby or rock him to sleep. The three of them, now four, continued to be a family in all the ways that mattered. 2 years passed in a blur of work and joy and the million small moments that make up a life. Jacob grew into a sturdy toddler with his mother's eyes and his father's determination. Samuel, now 15, had shot up in height and was turning into a fine young man. The homestead expanded. They built a chicken coop and a smokehouse, cleared more land for planting, and Fairmont, to everyone's surprise, finally left them alone. Rumor had it that he had overextended himself buying up all that land and was now struggling financially. Whatever the reason, he stopped harassing settlers and focused on keeping his own operation afloat. Clara often thought about how much her life had changed since that terrible moment when the barn beam fell. How one event, one moment of crisis, had brought Colton into their lives and transformed everything. She had been so determined to do everything herself, to prove she did not need help. Now she understood that accepting help, accepting love, did not make her weak. It made her stronger. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jacob asleep in Colton's arms and Samuel inside doing his lessons, Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked. It was a question she asked him sometimes, needing reassurance that he did not regret leaving his mountain solitude. "More than I ever thought possible," Colton replied, as he always did. You know, before I met you, I thought I knew what I wanted. Peace, solitude, simplicity. But I was wrong. This is what I wanted. I just did not know it yet. No regrets about your cabin in the mountains. I go up there sometimes, Colton said, when I need to think or when I am checking my trap lines, but it does not feel like home anymore. Home is here with you and the boys. The boys, Clara repeated with a smile. I love that you call them that, both of them. Samuel is my son in every way that matters, Colton said seriously. I may not have fathered him, but I am raising him. That makes him mine. Clara felt her eyes sting with tears, the good kind. He thinks the world of you, you know. He told me the other day that he wants to be just like you when he grows up. Poor kid, Colton said, but he was smiling. He could do a lot better than a reformed mountain man. I do not think so, Clara said. I think he has the best role model he could ask for. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Inside, Samuel called out that he had finished his lessons, and Clara went in to check his work. It was solid. The boy was smart and applied himself. He would go far in life. She was certain of it. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, Clara lay awake next to Colton, listening to his steady breathing. She thought about her father, about whether he would approve of the man she had married, of the life she had built. She thought he would. Colton embodied everything her father had valued: honesty, hard work, dedication to family. I wish you could have met him, she whispered to her sleeping husband. I think you two would have been friends. Colton stirred, his arm automatically pulling her closer even in sleep. Clara smiled and let herself drift off, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own challenges and joys. Samuel turned 18 and began courting the daughter of the family 5 miles east, a sensible girl named Margaret who made him smile. Jacob grew into an energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the skills Colton had once learned from his own father. And then, unexpectedly, when Jacob was 5, Clara found herself pregnant again. She was 34 now, and this pregnancy was harder than the first, but she was determined. Their daughter, named Ruth after Colton's mother, was born on a warm spring day, tiny and perfect and loved. The homestead continued to prosper. They expanded their livestock, bought more land, became one of the more successful operations in the area. Other settlers would sometimes come to Colton for advice, and he would help them the way he had once helped Clara, never asking for more than a meal in return. Fairmont eventually lost everything and left Colorado, disappearing to parts unknown. His land was divided up and sold, mostly to settlers who had been waiting for the opportunity. The region became more settled, more civilized, though it never lost its wild edge. Samuel married Margaret when he was 22, and they built a house on the eastern section of the property, staying close but establishing their own independence. Colton helped them build it, teaching Samuel's new wife the same skills he had taught Clara years before. Within a year, Samuel and Margaret had a daughter of their own, making Clara and Colton grandparents. Through it all, Clara and Colton's love never wavered. If anything, it deepened with time, growing from the passionate intensity of new love into something richer and more complex. They had built a life together from nothing, had faced down threats and overcome obstacles. They knew each other's flaws and loved despite them, or perhaps because of them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colton took Clara back to the spot where they had first met, where the barn had once stood collapsed. It had been rebuilt so well that no trace of that accident remained. I think about that day sometimes, Clara said, her hand in his. About how terrified I was, how desperate. I think about it too, Colton said. I was on my way to town, planning to be gone by nightfall. If I had been even 30 minutes slower, if I had taken a different path, I never would have heard the barn collapse. Everything would be different, Clara agreed. Samuel might have died. I might have lost the homestead. We never would have met. I do not like thinking about that possibility, Colton said, pulling her close. Because this, right here, this is everything I never knew I wanted. Me too, Clara said, rising on her toes to kiss him. The best things in life are the ones you do not see coming. They stood together in the evening light, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. The house, the barn, the fields, and beyond them, Samuel's home where their grandchild was growing up. Inside the main house, Jacob and Ruth were probably getting into some kind of mischief. It was chaotic and loud and messy and absolutely perfect. More years passed, each one a gift. They watched their children grow, saw Jacob become a skilled carpenter and Ruth develop a talent for training horses. More grandchildren arrived, filling the homestead with noise and laughter. Clara and Colton grew older, their hair turning gray, their movements a bit slower, but their love remained constant. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The house was full of family and friends, people whose lives had been touched by this couple who had defied expectations and built something lasting. Colton stood and made a toast, something he rarely did, as public speaking still made him uncomfortable. 25 years ago, he said, his hand finding Clara's. I was a man who had given up on having a family, on being part of something bigger than myself. I lived alone in the mountains and told myself I was happy. Then I heard a barn collapse and went to investigate, and I found this woman trying to lift a beam that was far too heavy for her, trying to save her brother, refusing to give up even when any reasonable person would have. Clara squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears. She was the bravest person I had ever met, Colton continued. And somehow, for reasons I will never fully understand, she let me into her life. She let me help rebuild that barn, and then she let me stay. She married me, gave me children, made me part of her family. Everything good in my life started that day when the barn fell, and I found her fighting to save what mattered most. He turned to look at Clara directly. You are still the bravest person I know, Clara Armstrong, and I am still grateful every single day that you chose me. There was not a dry eye in the house. Clara stood and kissed her husband, and their family cheered and celebrated late into the night. As Clara approached her 50th birthday, she sometimes thought about how different her life could have been. She could have given up the homestead after her father died, could have moved to town with Samuel, could have settled for a conventional life. Or she could have stayed stubborn and independent, refusing help until pride destroyed her. Instead, she had found a middle path. She had fought for what mattered but had been wise enough to accept help when it was offered honestly. And that choice, that moment of accepting Colton into her life, had changed everything. Their 30th anniversary was quiet, just the two of them sitting on the porch as the sun set behind the mountains. Their children were grown with families of their own. The homestead was thriving, likely to pass down through generations. They had built something that would last. Do you ever miss the mountains? Clara asked. Your cabin, the solitude? Colton considered the question. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it, he admitted. But I would not trade this for anything. That life, it was not really living, it was just existing. This, with you, with our family, this is living. Even with all the noise and chaos, Clara teased. They could hear their grandchildren playing in the yard, shrieking and laughing. Especially with the noise and chaos, Colton said, pulling her close. Besides, we can always escape to the cabin if we want peace and quiet. It is still there, waiting. They did that sometimes, took trips up to Colton's old cabin for a few days, just the two of them. It was a chance to reconnect, to remember who they had been before children and responsibility. But they always came back to the homestead, because that was where their hearts truly lived. As they moved into their 60s, time began to slow down in that strange way it does when you realize there is more behind you than ahead. But Clara and Colton faced aging the way they faced everything, together, with honesty and grace. Colton's hair turned fully white, and his body bore the marks of decades of hard labor. But he was still strong, still capable, still the man who had lifted that beam alone so many years ago. Clara developed arthritis in her hands, which frustrated her, but she adapted, finding new ways to do the tasks she had always done. They celebrated their 40th anniversary surrounded by 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. The homestead had expanded to include several buildings now, a small compound where the extended family lived and worked together. What Jacob Reynolds had started with a single cabin and determination had grown into something remarkable. "We did good," Clara said to Colton that night as they lay in bed, listening to the house settle around them. "We did," Colton agreed. "Better than good. Any regrets?" "None." He turned to face her in the darkness. "Not a single one. You—" "Only that we did not have more time," Clara said. "That we were not younger when we met. I would like another 40 years with you." "I will give you as many as I have," Colton promised. "Every day, for as long as we both shall live." They were promises they could not fully keep, of course. Time was not something anyone could control. But they kept them as well as they were able, choosing each other every day, finding joy in the simple fact of being together. When Clara was 68, she became ill with pneumonia. It came on suddenly during a cold snap in December, and despite Colton's desperate care, she weakened quickly. The doctor came from town but could do little except make her comfortable. Colton sat by her bed day and night, holding her hand, talking to her, refusing to leave even for meals. Their children came, gathering around their mother's bed, and Clara looked at them with pride. "I am so grateful," she whispered to Colton when they were alone, "for all of it, for you." "Do not talk like you are leaving," Colton said, his voice breaking. "You are going to be fine. You are the strongest person I know." But they both knew the truth. Clara pulled his hand to her lips and kissed it gently. "I love you," she said. "From that first day when you lifted the beam, I loved you. You gave me everything, Colton. A full life, a beautiful family, more happiness than I ever dreamed possible." "You gave me the same," Colton said, tears streaming down his weathered face. "You gave me everything, Clara. Everything." She held on for 3 more days, fighting with that same determination she had shown trying to lift the beam so many years ago. But finally, on a quiet morning with snow falling gently outside, Clara Reynolds Armstrong passed away surrounded by her family, Colton's hand in hers until the very end. The funeral was held at the homestead, because Clara had never really belonged to the town. She belonged here, to the land her father had claimed, to the family she had raised, to the mountains that had been her home. They buried her on a hill overlooking the valley, where she could see the house and barn and fields that had been her whole world. Colton stood by her grave long after everyone else had left, his shoulders bent with grief. Samuel came to stand beside him, this boy he had helped raise, now a man in his 40s with gray in his beard. "She loved you so much," Samuel said quietly. "You gave her such a good life, Colton." "She gave me mine," Colton replied, his voice rough with tears. "I was not living before I met her, just existing. She taught me how to live." The months after Clara's death were the hardest of Colton's life. He had spent 38 years with her, more than half his life, and her absence left a hole that nothing could fill. But he kept going, because that was what Clara would have wanted. He helped with the grandchildren, maintained the homestead, taught his sons and daughters the skills they would need to keep the place running after he was gone. And he visited her grave every day, talking to her about the small events of daily life, keeping her updated on the family she had left behind. "Jacob finished the new chicken coop," he would say, "and Ruth's daughter is getting married in the spring. You would like her young man. He is a hard worker, respectful, reminds me of myself at that age." 2 years after Clara's death, on a warm spring morning, Colton was walking back from her grave when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He made it to the porch and sat down heavily, and he knew this was it. His time was ending too. Samuel found him there an hour later, slumped peacefully in his chair, looking out over the land he had helped build. The doctor said it was his heart, that it had simply given out, but the family knew better. Colton had died of a broken heart, of missing the woman who had been his everything. They buried him beside Clara, just as he would have wanted. The whole family gathered, 3 generations coming together to mourn and remember. They told stories about Colton, about his strength, his quiet wisdom, his absolute devotion to the family he had chosen. "He showed me what it meant to be a man," Samuel said at the funeral, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just in terms of strength or skill, but in terms of character. He could have walked away so many times. That first day when the barn fell, he could have helped us and left, but he stayed. He chose us, over and over again, every single day." The homestead continued after they were gone, passed down through the generations. The barn that Colton had rebuilt stood for over 100 years, a testament to his skill and dedication. And the story of how he and Clara met, the mountain man who lifted a beam alone and found his heart in the process, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. Because it was not just a story about love, though it was certainly that. It was a story about courage and choice, about 2 people who could have given up but decided to fight for what they wanted. It was about accepting help when it was needed and offering it freely when you had it to give. It was about building a life one day at a time, finding joy in the work, and never taking for granted the people who stood beside you. Years later, one of their great-great-grandchildren would stand on the same hill where Colton and Clara were buried, looking down at the homestead that had grown into a small ranch. The barn, finally replaced after a century of service, stood solid and strong. The house had been expanded and modernized, but still retained the bones of what Jacob Reynolds had built so long ago. And on the graves of Colton and Clara Armstrong, fresh flowers appeared every week, placed there by family members who had never met them but knew their story, understood their legacy, and honored the love that had started it all. The inscription on their shared headstone was simple. Together they built a life, together they rest. And beneath that, added later by their children, he lifted the beam, she lifted his heart. It was, everyone agreed, the perfect summary of a love story that had begun with disaster and ended with legacy. A love that had transformed 2 lonely people into the foundation of a family that would endure for generations. In the end, that moment when the barn beam fell, when Clara Reynolds tried desperately to save her brother and Colton Armstrong appeared to help, had changed everything. Not just for them, but for everyone who came after. Because they had chosen love over fear, partnership over independence, and in doing so, they had built something that would outlast them both. A family, a home, and a story that would never be forgotten.